Okay, we will continue with white magic. We're still on Rule 10. We'll be on it for a while longer because there's a lot to cover in it. But we were talking about ways for the disciple to make higher contact. And there's a lot of people that put emphasis on the heart only. They say, become mindless, put away the mind. The heart is the way to God. What do you think about that? Is that true, or is the mind completely useless for the seeker, or is that some type of illusion we're dealing with there? What do you guys think?
Part of a trinity, the head, heart, and hand.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, even some Bailey students kind of think that way. Yet even with the extract from the Tibetan, he says this. He says, if the information rises the aspiration of the will to serve from the plane of emotions to that of the mind, the plane whereon the masters can be found. That's in the introduction of every Alice A. Bailey book, yet still a lot of people who read Alice A. Bailey fall for this mindless idea. But he says the plane of the mind is the plane whereon the masters can be found. Now, what is overlooked by a lot of students is the linkage between the heart and the mind. The heart center is called the center of what? Love what? Love dash
wisdom.
Right, love, wisdom. And would you call wisdom then an aspect of the mind?
Well, yeah. It's
right.
Being wise in your reason, and come let us reason together and use logic. All truths are logical.
And what's interesting is there is a duplicate of the heart center, a reflection of the heart center in the head center itself. So this links the heart and the mind. So if you're centered on the higher aspect of the mind, you're linked up to the heart, or to the higher aspects of the heart automatically. But what do you suppose the danger is on people saying, just follow your heart and everything will be cool? How can that lead to disaster sometimes? And what's the reason that can be a problem?
Well, just look around for one thing. First thing is a total misunderstanding. The heart thing really goes back to the ancient teachings, and the heart there, for the lower students, the heart was the heart right here. The heart center was 2 fingers away from the center of the chest. For the higher students, the heart was Atma and Buddha. So it was a self. The heart was the self. Now they've completely debassed this and twisted it around to where they got it down to your heart and your feelings and all this stuff. So really it's a total misunderstanding of past teachings. And if you want to see how it affects everything, just look around at all these people on all these different lists following their heart. It almost gets comical at times.
Right. When a lot of people think follow their heart, what they're really thinking is follow my lower emotions.
Exactly.
So there's a difference between the lower emotions and the heart energy. The heart energy represents spiritual love, which produces in the person the will to serve, the will to share, the will to be one with others, and the will to feel the soul in other people and to see the highest good in other people, whereas the lower emotions concentrates on self. So when the average person talks about following his heart, he's talking about, well, you want a new car, go buy it. If you want, you need to go find somebody that's going to fulfill you, and you think of what you want when the average person thinks of following his heart. And a lot of people are kind of falling into this. They think, well, go with the flow was a big thing in the New Age movement. And going with the flow, well, you go with the flow. That means you take drugs if you feel like taking drugs, or you do promiscuous if you want to be promiscuous. So everything's cool, And so that's kind of the direction people follow. And the Bible itself says the heart is the most deceptive of all things. Now, when it says that, it's not talking about the higher heart energies, but it's talking about people's normal desires lead them into a lot of illusion. That's what the direction that prophet was trying to lead us toward, not talking about the higher heart energies. So it's important to realize that the difference between the higher and the lower, and to put some emphasis on the mind, because just ordinary old common sense from the average part of the mind that the average person can access can keep seekers out of a lot of trouble. Because how many seekers do you know that, when people, for instance, they break off from the church, they think, I'm free, I can do anything I want now. And then they do a lot of crazy stuff because they don't have any religion guiding them anymore. And people who do this, and they kind of go a little bit overboard, and they need to keep that connection with common sense. Not everything you learn in Sunday school is bad or needs to be discarded. Some of the basic stuff is still applies. You don't go out and steal from your neighbor and different things like that.
But sometimes your heart and your mind are already linked, and if you've experienced that before, it's like, well, all right, now I have to perform some magic here. Now, what was it again? Was it lefty loosey, righty tight, or was it, or should I just throw up this handful of glitter and poof, it'll make the magic? And sometimes the silliest things work the best. I mean, because there already is a link, and your mind and your heart are working together, whether you know it or not. And so sometimes you don't have to know every single magic word that has to be said in the right order. Sometimes you just say the right, by dumb luck, you say the right things at the right time, and everything is like, wow, I couldn't have planned that better. And
right. And you gotta keep the heart and the mind linked. The heart represents female energy and the mind represents male energy, and we have to have both of them. If we discard one and just try to be like Spock, it'll lead to disaster. If we discard the mind and be like Bones on Star Trek, where we're emotional all the time, then that's disaster. We need the focus on that. And I've often used that example from Star Trek for that. You have Bones on there, is very emotional. He's focused on the heart, the lower heart energies. Spock is on just the regular mind energies. And then you have Kirk, who's a balance between the two,
I was just telling Deanie recently that my nickname on Star Trek would be like Slash, because it's always scientist / philosopher, poet / artist. It's like so Slash would be mine.
Yeah. So anyway, we need to have those balance, and that's a very illusionary teaching to become mindless. Now, there's an aspect of mindlessness taught in meditation techniques, which is good in the fact that it's important that we be able to control our thoughts. so that we can silence them and go into a meditative state. But that's different than being, I wouldn't call that mindlessness. The mind is still there.
That's
Matter of
right.
fact, the mind is the one that's controlling the thoughts, the actual mind. Mind and the thoughts that clutter up your brain are really two different things. But so when Buddhism talks about mindlessness, it's not talking about mindlessness the way that some people think about it. Okay, the next thing he points out is, he says, no matter how unimportant we think we are, he says, we're all capable of wielding a mighty force through right thinking, which depends upon many things. And he says it might be useful to state a number of these things which will help, just if we think we're just not special or anything like that. And so we have problems on two extremes. Either people think they're too special or else they think they're not special enough, and we got to have a balance. But the truth is each one of us has tremendous potential. He says the disciples will accumulate an ability to sense vision. He said through the intuition, they'll sense the plan, as do the masters, which will bring new sources of power to the disciple. Okay, so that as seekers here, we are implored to try to sense what the plan is. First of all, the first part of this is to sense what the plan is on your own life. We go through cycles in our life, where in each cycle of our life, we will have a new unfoldment and we'll see the next step. The next step becomes clear. So in your own life, you got to see your next step. Like, oh, Joshua there just, he's in between jobs right now, and his next step, he's probably really putting a lot of contemplation on where that's going to go, which that's what happens to us. And so say maybe somebody else might have just got a divorce, and they got to figure out what their next step is now. And so there's always some next step, and maybe you have a next step coming and you're not thinking about it the way you should. Maybe we need to put more attention on that. So first of all, we got to figure out what our next step is. But beyond that, the disciple needs to figure out what's humanity's next step, and how can I participate in moving that ahead so it happens faster. What do you think the next major step for humanity is right now that they should be taking?
Recently I've been thinking about the whole free speech stuff, like Jordan Peterson, these people that have gotten a lot of traction that are speaking up about things. But I sort of had an impression recently that, like, the focus is maybe shifted a little bit from that. An impression I got was like on metaphysical kind of stuff. So I think it might have to do with that. Some stuff you've said, and like what you posted on BBR about how Tibetan was saying all of this effort needs to be put into showing people about the ageless wisdom and stuff, and it seems like that hasn't happened for at least not much for a lot of decades.
Yeah, he said millions and billions of dollars need to be put into it, and Lucis Trust, they hardly have any money. They're accused of having millionaires support them and everything, but they really don't have very much money to work with, and neither does anybody else in the New Age. The only people with money in the New Age movement and esoteric are kind of people that are in it for the money and don't have much enlightenment. And I notice that these type of people are pretty good at raising money, but they don't take people anywhere normally. Maybe a handful do, but The ones that focus on money don't produce the spiritual advance. But yeah, I think free speech is a big one. I think Jordan Peterson is becoming so popular because he's kind of enunciating where humanity needs to go and to having more free thought, refocus on free speech and things like that. But yeah, the next step for the spiritual work, which is lagging far behind, because DK expected I think the work to be much farther advanced than it is right now, is to get out to have enlightened teaching, actual enlightened teachings, get out in the public sphere. Now, another number of elementary things have done pretty good, like, say, the Celestine Prophecy, Conversations with God, Eckhart Tolle, and these are really basic elementary stuff.
The Secret.
Yeah, The Secret, that kind of people glom onto because they think it's going to help them on an individual basis somehow. But nothing is out there about things that will help move humanity ahead as a whole. And and this is a thing that DK complains about quite a bit in his books, is that it's a tendency of people to want material out there that's going to help them succeed financially or get more love in their life and to fulfill their personal desires. And he says one of the problems with the great invocations that he gave out was that when people said them, they didn't think of the benefit of the planet so much as they saw it as a personal thing that was going to help them. And he says we need to get beyond that, beyond just thinking of ourselves and thinking of the whole. And he says this is a big problem with even a lot of disciples, that we need to think of on a broad of aspect as possible. And so this is the reason that the work hasn't succeeded the way he hoped, was that the disciples have not have thought more about how everything's going to benefit them personally, more than being the servant. You read the life of Christ, is very interesting. Never did he talk about how anything was ever going to benefit him. He only made one plea, that was in the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, Father, if it be possible, remove this cup from me, otherwise, thy will be done. And that was the only personal benefit that he ever mentioned about himself, and then he forfeited that. But so he set the example for us as to the attitude that we need to have. But you look at his life, everything was centered around being the servant. And being the servant, he also become the master. And so that's important. Okay, the next thing he says how little that people see is astounding to him. He says, now, not very many things he says are astounding, but he says that's one thing that's astounded. He says, we need to bring ideas down from the formless to the form, and then it becomes concrete thought, something that can be definitely vitalized and appropriated as a basis for thought. So this is another thing that disciples like us need to do. We need to focus on ideas. Ideas are like formless. We need to go into the formless area and sense things that need to materialize, and visualize them and bring them down so our minds are focused on things in harmony with higher will. He says, then comes a period of gestation where you build your thought form and bring into full awareness through power of will. You find your thought form of the vision is clothed in matter of mental and astral planes. Okay, so the white magician gets these ideas. Then he focuses on them, and the instead of just using our desire energy for self-fulfillment, put that desire energy in a thought form that can materialize and be of service to humanity. And it must be clothed in mental and astral or emotional substance. He says, bring the idea down to the physical. It needs the many to materialize, but starts with the few. Now, we're attempting to create a spiritual or a molecular group, and so we go through that process of getting the concept in our mind, finding it desirable, clothing it in emotional and mental substance. And then when it begins to materialize, it starts with a few and then eventually extends to the many. But it will only extend to the many when the materialization becomes correct and usable for the many. The mistake a lot of disciples make is that they'll pick up maybe a divine idea and then filter it with a lot of their own illusions and desires and lower desires, and put things in there that pollute the idea, and then they try to move it to the many, and it doesn't really work because the idea has been corrupted. Now, sometimes corrupted ideas do work, like look at Christianity. Christ presented a great divine idea of loving your neighbor and creating an organization of great service. And then eventually the emperors got a hold of the idea when it became popular, and they corrupted it. And we had a system of authoritative religion that burnt heretics at the stake and tortured people and did all kinds of terrible things. So it's possible for a corrupt idea to also permeate society. And there's always a certain amount of corruption. But in order for it to take off, it has to be fairly pure. Just like at the foundation of the United States, the Constitution and the ideas were quite pure when they took off, and that caused the great minds to really glom onto it. And since then, there's been a lot of corruption. The same thing with the early Christian church. It was quite pure in the beginning, and that caused it to take off and have a seed planted. But then it became corrupted. But in a corrupt state, it does often reach the masses, so the masses are able to benefit even though it's not in its pure state. And this is a thing with many of the New Age teachings. Alice A. Bailey and Madame Blavatsky's ideas and writings have were glommed onto by a lot of people, and because of their original purity, they had a lot of power. But then when they were glommed onto by selfish individuals that were into self-promotion, they altered a lot of them, and they got quite a bit of attention. But so even though they're presented in an altered state, with some corruption, some truth does filter into the minds of the people. But so the next step is to, I think, a new presentation needs to be made, and it'd be great if we could fulfill DK's desire and figure out some way to get millions or even billions of dollars available to promote the pure esoteric teachings. That would send a shockwave through the various religions and churches of the world, as well as even the non-religious people. It would be interesting to see the effect if DK's desire there came to pass.
We have to appropriate the mass media, which seems to be informing people the most.
Yeah, Eckhart Tolle made a pretty good move in getting on Oprah. He got a lot of attention there, and if we could have somebody get on Oprah that was a good Alice A. Bailey student, that would be a big advance for.
I'll put your name in.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've been trying to get on Coast to Coast. Haven't managed that. We have had a couple members of the group get on Coast to Coast, though.
Did they mention you? Did Sharon mention you when she was on recently?
No, it was kind of too awkward. I did have I can't remember his last name, Scott. He was into the chemtrails and on Coast to Coast, and he mentioned me on there, and I got quite a bit of activity just from having my name mentioned. And they did check me out after that, but the gal called me up and talked to me, and I got the impression that I did not impress her. So and I never heard back from them. But yeah, we've had 3 or 4 members of our group, the Keys of Knowledge, get on Coast to Coast, and
You have to appeal to their astral illusion.
yeah. They're
not just to the illusion, though. There's a certain, I think when DK says you have to add on the astral material, the desire, I think he's talking about putting the sparkle on it. It takes a certain amount of us as a group to do this magic, to put some sparkle in it, so that it's like, oh, everybody's like, ooh, that's pretty. I want some of that. I want to learn about that kind of thing. But we have to be like our own cheerleaders or pep squad.
Yeah.
We have to go around like Tinkerbell with fairy dust and get this stuff out here by making it glitter, in a sense.
Yeah.
You have to reach people, like Rick, you're saying you have to reach people on their level and before you can raise them up.
Right.
They're attracted to glamour and glitz and the lower astral, and start yank them from where they stand.
Have you ever been to a rock concert that didn't have a light show? You got to have something sparkly, you know what I'm saying? You need
a certain amount of truth there, and that's the great part, is there's a lot of people out there that if we can get their attention and they do learn a couple good esoteric truths, then they'll catch on fire about it. And I've seen that happen a number of times, where people just didn't realize what was out there. And a lot of people think the highest that's out there is just in the churches, and they don't realize all the other material that's available. And now DK says this interesting statement. He says, to those who wrestle, strive, and hold on, the joy is doubled when materialization comes. The joy of contrast will be yours, for knowing the past of darkness, you will revel in the light of fruition. The joy of tried and tested companionship will be yours. For years you will have proved to you who are your choice associates. The joy of having helped to solace a needy world, of having brought light to darkened souls, of having healed in some measure the open sore of the world's distress will be yours, and in consciousness of days well spent, and in the gratitude of savage souls comes the deepest joy of all. So work not for joy, but towards it, not for reward, but from the inner need to help, not for gratitude, but from the urge that comes from having seen the vision and realization of the part you have to play in bringing that vision down to earth. It's a little bit like that old maximum that happiness is found not in the end, but in the journey, you know. And that's kind of the message that he's given there, that it's the journey that's important. You don't think of what you're going to get, but think of the journey you're going to have in bringing this light to humanity and to others. Okay, any comments or questions before we move ahead there?
Yeah, part of my journey has been to wake people up and get them to think and ask questions. And it's amazing how few people can really defend their beliefs and belief systems, especially in organized religion. But I think the next step for humanity is for people to just start thinking on their own, independent of social media or their religion or their leaders. And that's what the world stage, and especially political stage in our country, is setting up. People have to think, why do I want to support this president, or why am I against him, you know, to a place that they've never been before. I think that's the next step for humanity, is just to get the average person to think and begin to actually justify his beliefs on the mental plane.
Yeah, one thing that tickled me about Curtis, when we were both left the Mormon church and then attempted to enlighten our fellow Mormons, he would, when we'd start talking to somebody, he would often ask them, he says, do you consider yourself to be open-minded? And I don't think you ever asked that question where you got a no answer, did you? Everybody thought they were open-minded?
They were all open-minded.
Yeah, then after they said they were open,
so open, their brains fell out.
Right, then after they said they're open-minded, Curtis would ask them a controversial question, and their answer immediately illustrated they were not open-minded at all.
Yeah, it was about building Zion or plan of salvation. Well, do you believe that we're going to continue to progress forever and ever beyond the celestial, like the scriptures say? Yes or no? You know, just ask them simple yes or no questions, and they were immediately stymied.
Right. Yeah, if you want to find out if LDS guy is open-minded, say, well, are you willing to consider something the prophet thinks is wrong?
One time, my sister Susan and I were in Provo, Utah, where they had the language training section to prepare missionaries to teach in different foreign lands. And there were about 24 elders gathered together, and I said, let's go have some fun. And I walked in the middle of them, and I said, good to see you good brothers out here on a fine day. Hey, by the way, did you guys know that Joseph Smith believed in and taught plurality of lies and called reincarnation? And Susan started passing out reincarnation and Mormonism pamphlets. Did you know that he actually believed in and taught reincarnation? And they, complete silence. because they never heard that before. They'd never been placed in a position where they had to think that, and they didn't know what to say. And one of them, the leader of the group, stepped forward. He says, "Well, no, that's a doctrine of the devil. You're wrong. That's that." Well, I said, "Well, right here, it says that Elizar Snow was taught reincarnation by Joseph Smith. It says it right here, and I'll challenge you to a debate." And
Yeah.
almost immediately, the group dispersed and they all walked away.
Yeah, another thing we used to use quite regularly was to ask them a question and then they say, can you just give me a simple yes or no on this?
Yeah.
Oh,
Do you
tell
believe
them that.
Joseph Smith, yes or no? Do you believe the scriptures, yes or no? That's what we said to Bruce R. McConkie and Marky Peterson. Do you accept the scriptures, yes or no?
Yeah. We got to see the heads of the Mormon church at that time. The prophet was out of commission because he had suffered a stroke right after he refused to see Curtis. Within 3 days of refusing to see Curtis, he suffered a stroke. And so we eventually got in to see the ones that were in charge, which was Bruce R. McConkie and Marky Peterson. And we got in an argument with them, and they didn't seem to believe in the teachings of their founder, Joseph Smith. You know, we were talking to him, and old Curtis says to Bruce R. McConkie, he says, "Do you believe in the teachings and writings of the prophet Joseph Smith?" He says, "A simple yes or no, please."
Well, you remember the argument. The argument was we wanted a retrial, and they didn't want to give us a retrial. And it says in section 130, I believe, that we were entitled to a retrial from the standing high council, as though no such decision had been made by the lower council that had excommunicated us. So basically, we were entitled to a trial through an appellate court. And I said, "Now, do you believe this scripture to be true, yes or no?" I said, because over in section 29, it says that if you do not accept these scriptures as they are written, you shall be damned if you so continue. So those two scriptures, it was checkmate. Do you believe this or not? Yes or no?
Yeah, and McConkie says back to Curtis when he asked him that, he says, "You do not need to know that." He says, "All you need to know is that we have a living prophet, and what he says goes."
He said, "You can forget Joseph Smith." He said,
Right.
"You can forget the scriptures."
That's right. Forget
But all
Joseph
you
Smith.
need to
That's what he
know
said.
is we have a living prophet at the head of our church today, and when the prophet speaks, the thinking has been done.
Yeah, and the prophet was in pretty much of a coma at that
He
point.
couldn't even speak.
But yeah, so Curtis asked him again. He says, "You didn't
Oh
answer
my
my
God.
question." He says, "A simple yes or no, please. Do you accept the writings of Joseph Smith?" And he says, McConkie says again louder, waving his hands, he says, "Forget Joseph Smith." He says,
Yeah.
"All you need to know is the living prophet."
And then he says,
Curtis
"This
still didn't.
interview is
Curtis
over."
still didn't let up. He says, "Yeah, but you know, my mom and dad would be interested in the answer to your question because they're really good members of the church and they respect you guys a lot. So simple yes or no, please. Do you accept the teachings of Joseph Smith?" And McConkie rose up on his feet. He says, "Forget Joseph Smith. All you need to know is that there's a living prophet." And he says, "I think this discussion is over."
That was it.
And they ushered us out of the room. But
That'd be pretty funny coming from a mainstream Christian. Forget Jesus Christ. All you need to worry about is the bishop.
right. That's about
That's
what it
tantamount.
was. I mean, if we were interviewing the Pope and he said that would be comparable to the Pope saying, "Forget Jesus," you know, or Billy
Yeah.
Graham saying, "Forget Jesus," you know. because
Well, it's a flawed religion.
is the authority in the Mormon Church, you know. So yeah, it was interesting, and I've written the full story on that in one of my books there about our interview there and what happened. We don't have time to go into all the details, but so it was interesting. That, but what was interesting was the next general conference. I was interested in seeing what McConkie would teach on, and he gave a big dissertation on
Following the brethren.
how wonderful the prophet Joseph Smith was. That was his next speech at the conference.
Oh my God!
Yeah, the Pope's on pretty thin ice at the moment right now too.
What'd you say, Rick?
I said right now the Pope's on pretty thin ice.
Yeah, that's religion is undergoing a lot of change, and you know, people are withdrawing from regular religion. A lot of people are identifying as not religious at all, but they still believe in God, and they see themselves as spiritual. They're kind of like us right here. There's a lot more people out there that are just tired of just the regular rah-rah religion and going alternative somehow. And so people are kind of waking up to the idea that regular religion just doesn't have enough for them. It's kindergarten and they're ready to graduate and go to a real school and maybe learn something that's really useful.
So you're saying that there's a vacuum being created?
Yeah. I mean, the people identify with as a regular church member is really the percentage. I can't remember the exact percentage, but if I remember right, over the past generation, it's gone down about 10 to 15%. I mean, it's gone down quite a bit. Yet there's quite a few people out there, and the posters kind of see these people as maybe kind of reprobates or non-religious or non-spiritual, but that's not necessarily true. A lot of these people are the most spiritual of all. They're just too spiritual for the churches. Because
you hear a lot of spiritual, not religious. SNR is the big catchphrase these days.
SMR, what does that mean?
Spiritual, SNR, spiritual, not religious.
Oh, yeah. And even a lot of people that the younger generation that sometimes when they reject churches, they see themselves in the atheist camp, where maybe they aren't that way really, but they're just in kind of a limbo because they don't know where to go. There's really, in any particular town, typical size town, there's nowhere for people to go to like attend any really good alternative spiritual service where they can really be fed some good spiritual food. And the best you can have is maybe go on a meetup online. There's a service there that tells you where different groups are meeting, and there's small groups that meet together all over the country, but there's nothing mainstream for people to really go to where they can learn something higher than is taught in the churches.
Well, in California, they had the Agape Church. Reverend Michael, who was very advanced spiritually, he taught that. Church of Religious Science teaches in Boise. They had 20 years ago when I'd go. They had a gathering of semi-enlightened people that would, talk spiritual philosophy and then mix and mingle after.
Yeah, there's
not much in New
yeah,
Plymouth.
the Church of Religious Science and Unity and those type of things are about as good as you can get in most towns. There's really nowhere that teaches Alice A. Bailey stuff or that that quality and material. But fortunately, where we're online with, it's kind of opened things up so you can find something for everybody now. And so the internet is really really a big advantage for us. The disadvantage of the internet, there's so much competition out there that everybody's fractured into small groups rather than getting together and pooling the resources toward enlightening the public. Okay, well, we've reached the end of our time already. Any comments or questions before we wrap it up?
Well, it's our responsibility and our honor to teach these things to our people right in our own neighborhood. You know, we have to teach the logic and the reality of reincarnation and karma. We have to show it how it's the only thing that makes sense, and we have to give examples of it right here in our neighborhood.
Well, that's a good point, and that's one thing we should all be aware of is sometimes you may have a circle of friends, and maybe one of those friends is ready, and we're not aware of it. And so, what I do is I have test questions for people that I meet, and I ask them certain questions that tell me whether or not they're kind of curious about taking a higher step for themselves. Like when I was in the Mormon church, my test question for fellow Mormons was, are you interested in knowing where the 10 tribes are? Because the 10 tribes is a big mystery in the Mormon church. And if they answered, well, not till the prophet lets us know, when the time comes, the prophet's going to let us know. And if they said that, well, I knew they weren't ready. But if they said, yeah, I'm kind of curious where those 10 tribes are, though, well, that was a signal to me, well, maybe the guy is interested in learning some mysteries, you know. And the same thing with people of the various religions. You can maybe say, well, do you think there's life on other planets? That's a good leading question. And if they say, well, I don't think about stuff like that, well, then you know they're not ready. But if they say, yeah, I've wondered about it, wondered about if these UFOs are really true or whatever, and so you can ask them leading questions, because the main quality that all searchers have is they're curious. They really wonder about mysterious things that's under the surface. And if they're happy with the status quo, if they believe everything they're fed over TV, then they're basically not ready. They need to stay in the regular churches, the regular political systems.
Well, there were a couple things, Joe, that you, when I first connected, that piqued my interest. One was in the Doctrine and Covenants, where you asked, do you know that there are beings that are smarter than the prophet? And I thought about it. I said, well, I imagine there would be. And then you showed me that scripture where it says that there are those holy men that you know not of. And we talked about who those holy men were. And then you introduced me to Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. And the other one was, there were kingdoms above the celestial. And in the Mormon church, the celestial is the highest, nothing greater. And yet here there are kingdoms that greater, higher than the celestial, showing.
Yeah, and it says it right in the Mormon scripture.
Right, showing the eternal progression. And I just want to say, Ed hit that nail right on the head when he said, we each have a personal responsibility to share with our communities and our neighborhood. To him who much is given, much is expected. And so we have to package these ideas in our own way, using our own unique personalities and gifts and talents to create a package of some kind that we can share with people that we come in contact with. And maybe ask them a question or two. It could be political, spiritual, social, whatever, to get them to think, get them to open their mind, and then have something. Well, I have something I want to share with you. So you've created a little opening, and then you fill it with something that you've prepared. Joe spent his life writing books, so to fill these voids. I've written works to fill these voids. Most of us here have some writing. It's time to just take what we have and open it up and share it, like Ed says, to members of our community.
Well, this would be a good assignment for everybody to come back with next week, is think of leading questions. What kind of questions can you ask your friends to test them to see whether or not they might want to take another step? What kind of questions can you ask people? So that'd be a good seed thought for everybody to think of during the next week.
Well, I see that there already are in people's consciousness things that they've observed that could be expanded on. And these things that are overlighting us of truth, they filter down through everyone in some way. And people have to see that which they already know. And we have to sort of water the seeds that are already in their garden, so to speak, that people have a sense of something.
Yeah.
And we can work with them. We can, from our own intuition, we can look at what their listening is.
And everybody has a connection with their own souls. It's just that we have a lot of static, and a lot of the static comes from the programming that they have from the time that they were young to where they are now. And we have to get beyond that programming to be able to reach them. Okay, we'll appreciate everybody showing up, and we will look forward to seeing you next Sunday. And don't forget to send good vibes throughout the week to Stefan and Cindy.
And each other.
And think of the group whenever you can. Think of the group being together, circulating those energies, keep those thoughts going. So we will see you next week.
The truth is out there, and it's hidden in plain sight.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot in plain sight, that's for sure.
Thank you,
I
JJ.
want to believe it.
Oh, yeah, Joe, thanks.
Yes, thank you, JJ. Have a
Good to
good
see you.
I love everyone.
Don't know. Okay.
Live long and prosper.